Hey, folks, I'm glad you're here, and I hope that you're enjoying your weekend. There's something about South American football that one has to really be real about. I can't go and deny that there's nothing wrong, that everything's okay, everything's fine and dandy, but there's a reality that needs to be said. The competitive nature of the Libertadores, the competitive nature of South American football itself, ends up being quite compromised when you start seeing certain realities come to fruition. There's a lot of things that you start to see as far as, well, teams being able to invest while others aren't. Some are in a tournament. Hey, you know what? Let's see how far we can go so we can generate some income to be able to make player transfers because that ends up making our semester. I remember at the beginning of the Libertadores, Bolivar made a huge investment to be able to get out of the first round, to be able to eventually go into the second and third, and eventually into the group stage, because that would end up helping them break even, maybe even making a profit in their in the expenses they had and the transfers that they had made and things along those lines that end up really helping them out in order to be able to, I don't know, balance their books. They advance out of the first stage, they get into the second stage and get eliminated. And then, of course, they start looking out for ways to be able to disband the team as quickly as possible. It took a little bit, but of course, winning the league is no longer enough. When you start having that particular situation or outlook in terms of a tournament, then the tournament ends up being in trouble. Not because the tournament is being poorly run. As a matter of fact, the tournament is being run as well as it possibly can be run. The tournament is just showing and exposing some of the problems that are existing within the system of each and every one of the leagues there. Case in point, let's go from the top and and start from the bottom, or go from the top and then start talking about teams in the bottom. And you start to see that some of the problems are very similar and they're repetitive and they're rinse and repeat. And you see the same thing very prevalent in every different league. In Brazil, for example, well, that's pretty much the exception to the rule. Brazil. That's why you see Brazil appear and then everyone else kind of sinking. Maybe Brazil's getting better, but you don't notice it. You start asking, is it getting better or is everyone getting worse? Or is everyone having more trouble being able to field teams? That is going to be a proverbial question. And you might have an answer for one, or at least for one side of the argument. You're going to have an answer for the other side of the argument as well. And they could be just as valid, one as much as the other. But Brazil has probably one of the leagues in which it can be very self sustaining. More than basically any, maybe the Premier League is self sustaining to a certain extent, but it also depends on TV rights from abroad. Brazil, not so much. Now they're getting the hang of going abroad and being able to have matches broadcast and earning some important rights out of it, or rights monies out of it. They've been doing it for the past 20 plus years, as a matter of fact. So Brazilian football is no stranger to the international scene. It's just it's doing a little bit more in terms of the international scene and generating brands that are worldwide no names, but worldwide no names that are a bit more assertive, a bit more known, or a bit more followed now compared to previous years. And that's why you see Palmeiras being so popular now, because they're being able, it's a well run club with very good investors and, of course, very good backing. Flamengo, what can I tell you about Flamengo? Of course, there's a running joke in Argentine media saying, "Hey, while River and and Boca are looking for Cavani and Suarez, well, Flamengo actually get Arturo Vidal, and they get Arturo Vidal and can compete with a European salary that they can offer Vidal. And they're also getting David Luiz, who still is able to play somewhat and still able to give him a good salary, competitive to what he was earning in Europe. And not only that, you end up being basically the kings of Rio. Not a bad place to be a king of, don't you think? So with all that in mind, you come into the beginning of a tournament, or to the Libertadores to be more specific, and you say which teams are going to win. Palmeiras, Flamengo, Atlético Mineiro. Atlético Mineiro, of course, investing a lot of money in their squad, but also investing money to be able to build a new stadium that's a little bit more than halfway done. And they're looking for ways to be able to generate revenue off of that stadium. So you start to see where the innovation is. You start to see how they're managing this particular situation, and it ends up being very interesting to see how Atlético Mineiro, if they're able to get results in combination with the investments that they're making from a foundational standpoint, how does that end up keeping them or maintaining their relevance and their competitive nature going in years to come? Hulk's not going to be around forever. Then you look at Argentina. Teams like River, who gets beat by a very, very pedestrian Vélez team. Yeah, you can talk about the controversy all you want, but in the 179 minutes, maybe 178, if you want to include the ball that comes in and Brian Romero at the beginning of the match ends up missing, which was probably the clearest chance that they had outside of the goal that was disallowed. They get beat in 178, 179 minutes, whatever you want to do, or wherever you want to go, or however you want to look at it. They get beat by a Vélez side that really had very little. But they had attitude. They had, we have attitude. We're going to do this. This is what we're going to do against River. And River had no answers. Then you start to see Marcelo Gallardo, who's not accustomed to having teams like this. He's going to have to get himself up. This is the first time that he's been eliminated at this phase in the round of 16 during his entire tenure at River. That ends up being a problem. Now, is he going to want to come back? Because remember, his contract does end at the end of this year, but keeping in mind the World Cup and the tournament in Argentina ends in October, we're most likely going to know in October if he's coming back or not, or he's going to finally make the jump to Europe. Because the reality is in Argentina, as far as the economic situation is concerned, they're not going to have the money available. Even if they did, they can't take it out of the country to be able to make a big time signing for a foreign player, or a player that's playing abroad for that matter. So what to do? What do you do? On top of that inflation, by the way, for those of you who didn't know, yeah, there's inflation in other countries as well. Boca is also a shit show. There's no other way to put it. From an administrative standpoint, from a transfer standpoint, from a standpoint that the team is not being able to handle things very properly. Of course, sacking Sebastián Bataglia. Bataglia during the press conference, and he blames the board for not being more aggressive in the transfers. It's kind of a weak argument, but it just seemed like he said, I'm out. I'm done. Whether you agree with him or not, it's irrelevant. Because the day after, I said, look, man, they didn't transfer. They didn't get me players. Wait a second. What do you mean they didn't get you players? Benedetto? Advíncula? Which he was there already, but Advíncula comes in during the Bataglia era. Romero? So we didn't get you players. I'm talking about the board. So fine, he starts to go in another tangent. So that ends up being another problem. They wanted Cavani. They wanted Vidal. They weren't going to get any of those. Cavani, when he hears what Boca was going to offer, he's like, well, thanks, man. I appreciate it, but no thanks. I'm going somewhere else. Where? Who knows? But not there. I know of a player. Well, I'll even use another club that's not even in Libertadores, and they're suffering, and they might end up having problems in relegation, which is Rosario Central, who's being coached by Carlos Tevez. They asked a player. I don't know if he's prominent. Maybe, yeah, he's well known. He had a good career in Mexico and in other places in South America as well, and in Europe. They asked him, "Hey, you want to come to the club?" Sure, yeah, no problem. But this is what we have. He says, "I can't live with that." So that's another reality that has to be faced in terms of Argentine play. And I'm talking about a foreign player. He says, "I can't live on that." And there's players in Argentina that they can't afford to live based on some of their salaries that they have. That's why they start looking for a way to get out and go elsewhere. As soon as they get an offer anywhere, fine. Hey, it's more than here. I'm out. Chile, another one. Do you know that the owners at the clubs or the presidents of the clubs do not want to spend in a reserve tournament because that means investing. That means investing in the future. That means investing in money that they might not see return on or money that they might not be able to put in their own wallets or pockets or whatever they end up putting money in nowadays. Well, that means logistics. That means that we have to spend on planes and travel. And oh, God forbid, we have to turn on the lights for games. Oh, God forbid, we have to do maintenance on a pitch. So that's the problem. There's no reserve tournament. The youth tournaments are quite limited in terms of time span. So there's the rule. Hey, by the way, you have to have a certain amount of minutes in which a player below a certain age, a youth player, has to be able to play in a league match. That you can change around any way you want, especially now with 5 substitutions. You can bring in a player and use him for 20 minutes, or maybe use him for 5, or if he's good, maybe use him for 90. But you catch my drift. It's not for the development of the players. It's just to be able to fulfill a particular requirement. So when you're trying to develop based on a requirement, you're just going to do the bare minimum most of the time instead of being interested in the overall function and the overall progress of a young player. Colombia, the same thing. And we can even go into the women's issue with them, as they just decided the day that the Women's Copa America is inaugurated and Colombia plays Paraguay, during the match they decide, hey, by the way, you're going to have a league after all. This is after saying, no, we're not going to have a women's league for the second half of the year. So then development. Of course, development goes with men's football like women's football. And that's a reality of South America. Peru, you can end up seeing some of the same conditions for some of the clubs. Ecuador, same thing. Paraguay, same thing. So when you start looking at Brazil, they are on top of everything because of spending power and because of economics and because of all that that's going on. That's not affecting them as much as the rest of South America, and therefore everyone else is truly affected. Because you have Brazil, then you have Argentina, and then you have everybody else. Depending on the year, it's one. Depending on the, it's kind of like depending on how things turn out. In the bottom tier there, everyone else is kind of like fighting for scraps. That's the reality. So when you can't compete and you know your chances of winning are limited or maybe even non-existent, what do you end up saying? Well, you know what? Let me just try and go as far as I can and earn as much as I can get. That ends up being the reality of South American football right now. The problem is that it's so easy for the owners and the presidents of clubs to just say, well, it is what it is. What can we do? So let's keep it as it is. As long as we're earning our money, it's okay. And that's the mentality that South American football and sometimes even South American social culture is as well. Well, it is what it is. We can't fix it. Let's just leave it and just live with it. So what do? Nah, no need to change. No need to do anything. It is what it is. Let's not change it. Let's not rock the boat. Let's just get it while the going's good, because this is as good as it's going to get. Let's not compete. Let's just be there. Let's just be happy that we're here. And therefore, now, when their national teams don't qualify for the World Cup, oh, damn. Chile, I'll give you that as a prime example. Colombia, I'll give you that as a prime example. Peru, I'll give you that as a prime example. They did not develop. They had good teams. They had good generations. And all of a sudden, those generations didn't produce as much as they did during their heyday. And you look back and, okay, who's going to replace X or Y player? Oh, there's no one. Not that there's no one that can maintain a similar level or improve the level of play. So what do? You might start looking abroad. You might start looking, and there's nothing wrong with looking abroad. Players that are eligible for a national team or eligible to be eligible to have a certain nationality have every right to play, but it's not helping the majority that are available. You're not using the resources, or you don't know how to use your resources when you have them. It's like having $1 million in the middle of the jungle. The only thing it's good for is to wipe your ass about. That's the only thing. But therein lies the problem. You have all the resources, you have all the possibilities, but it's then again the leadership that comes in and says, well, no. The scarcity mentality, the limitations in terms of the leadership, convenient limitation, because when it comes to their own, many have been able to fill their pockets significantly. And now, not only that, boy, when those rights monies come in, boy, they're looking not to invest, I should say, but they're looking for the nearest bank where they can deposit that money. That money that in many cases ends up being for them. Make sure you subscribe, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure you check it out. Make sure thumbs up, all the good stuff, and make sure, just help a brother out here. And also make sure that you, click on the little bell. Every time I come up with an idea or I get inspired, I'll put it up here. Let me know what you think. Talk to you soon.